Yeah, Frank Holland, talk about that, if you will, that you have Disney now looking at two of its largest affiliate, two companies that carry the most number of affiliates, saying even before they announce that they're going to take Jimmy Kimmel off the air, at least temporarily, that they're dropping the program altogether. What type of business pressure does that put on them, especially when you have one of these two companies that's going to be needing to get the federal government's approval for a merger, and you have the other one that has branded itself a right-wing local news outlet?
Well, Joe, good morning. I just want to make it clear. We don't really know the impact on the affiliates or even the ABC owned and operated stations. As this story develops, I'm sure a lot of people will try to investigate and try to figure that out. What we do know is that, as your previous guest just mentioned, is that these companies have some pretty major deals on the table. We have Nexstar trying to buy Tegna. And again, there's a 39% cap rule that Nexstar is hoping to have some type of exemption to in order to acquire Tegna. It's a $6.2 billion deal. At the same time, we have Disney hoping to acquire the media assets of the NFL and essentially bring the NFL network in-house. Now, there is a third part of this story. Right now, it's just anecdotal. The New York Post is reporting that there are some Disney Plus subscribers that are canceling their subscriptions in response to this decision from the co-chair of Disney Entertainment, Dana Walden, and CEO Bob Iger. If you go on social media, you can see some of those posts. But again, that's only anecdotal. This is certainly a developing story. Certainly too soon to tell the full business impact. I think we'll just have to wait and see.
So, Ann, we have, you are one of the experts on warning signs if a democracy slips away. And it seems like what we're seeing here, this playbook the Trump administration is putting forth, seems familiar that we've seen in other countries.
Yeah, so first of all, I would pick up on something somebody just said. You know, cancel culture, which took different forms, was usually the organization of online mobs or sometimes workplace mobs to harass people or get them fired. What we're seeing here is something that is actually different. This is actually government repression. This is the use of state institutions to influence media companies in their decisions about content. And this is the same way that censorship now works elsewhere in the world. So we all have in our minds maybe an idea of censorship. You know, there's like a guy in a room and he crosses out lines from the newspaper articles, and that's the censor. Actually, nowadays, censorship, whether it's in Russia or whether it's in Turkey or whether it's in Hungary, usually takes the form of a government regulatory body, or sometimes it's the tax authority, coming to a media company and saying, if you do X or Y, you're in trouble. And actually, Donald Trump, speaking about how much he hates all these these late night shows, and they're also mean to him. I mean, I think that's the key. The reason why these shows are being canceled is not because, in the case of Jimmy Kimmel, it's really not much to do with Charlie Kirk. It's because the president wants his critics off the air. And I think that's quite different from the phenomenon that we saw in some universities and cultural institutions a few years ago. And actually, the FCC boss talking about permission structure. The president's election gave us the permission structure to make these changes. I mean, that's an indication that they're thinking more of this as a structural change. This isn't about getting rid of somebody who was offensive.
Joe.
Yeah, you know, it's fascinating, the world that we live in right now, Ben. Yes, there are 40, 41, 42, 43% of the people who may be cheering what Donald Trump and Brendan Carr did together. I suspect it probably would be lower than that. We'll find out in the coming weeks. I'm sure people will poll that. But let's talk about the cross pressures on Bob Iger, because we're, of course, only looking at it from one direction. There were some angry MAGA supporters who put pressure on ABC, as they put pressure on ABC in the past to less effect. You've got Donald Trump. You got Brendan Carr. So Bob Iger and Disney is feeling that pressure. You then have the pressure of 60% of your viewers, 60% of Americans who were horrified that something like this would happen. You know, people, a good number of people, probably the majority of Americans, say, well, he didn't really love what he said there. He could have said it much better. And yeah, it's kind of offensive, but we don't censor in America. So talk about the cross pressures that Bob Iger's facing when you lurch far to the MAGA right. to check that box off, you leave about 60% of Americans behind. How does he deal with that in this new political landscape?
Well, I mean, I think he's in a difficult position in part because he's still managing, this declining but still very lucrative television business that is fighting for its life and doing whatever the White House, whatever the White House says to stay alive. I think, the Disney brand, which I think, historically is particularly bipartisan, beloved, has managed largely to stay out of politics, and which they preserve very carefully, is now absolutely getting dragged into the middle of this. And, as your previous guest said, people are canceling Disney's app in protest. I think the other very important stakeholders for them are Hollywood's creative community. And, I think a lot of those folks probably aren't sticking their heads above the parapet right now. But, I mean, Disney is bidding against its competitors for the, hottest actors, directors, writers, things like that. And I'm sure right now are fielding calls from all those people and their agents who are curious about this.